3 years after leaving the Navy SEAL teams, Tucker Hayes had built his life around one simple belief: Rook was enough. The old German Shepherd had been his canine partner overseas, his shadow at home, and the only soul Tucker still trusted. But civilian life had changed them both. Rook still searched for danger where there was none. Tucker still tried to protect a dog who no longer knew what he was protecting him from. Then, on a cold autumn evening in Boise, a 7-week-old German Shepherd puppy appeared outside his apartment door. It wasn't hurt. It wasn't crying. It simply sat there, staring at the one man who had no room left for anything new. Across the hallway, waitress Nora Ellis watched in silence. She expected Tucker to close the door, so did Rook. Instead, the former Navy SEAL stood there for a long moment. Then he opened it wider, and that small decision would change 5 lives before autumn was over. Before we begin, tell us what city you're watching from today. We'd love to know how far this story travels. Tucker Hayes lived on the 2nd floor of Maple Ridge Apartments, an old rental building on the west side of Boise, where the brick walls held the day's heat and released it slowly after dark. The place had narrow stairwells, humming hallway lights, and a parking lot where dry leaves gathered against the tires of work trucks and dented sedans. By late September, the air had begun to change, carrying the clean bite of colder mornings down from the foothills. Tucker noticed those things more than most people. He made his living fixing what other people had stopped looking at. A loose hinge on a backyard gate, a porch step that complained under weight, a fence panel leaning after a hard wind, a kitchen drawer that stuck every time someone tried to open it before coffee. He worked quietly, accepted payment without making the moment awkward, and usually left before a customer could turn politeness into conversation. That was how he preferred it. At 39, Tucker still moved like a man trained to save his energy until it mattered. He wore faded work shirts, scuffed boots, and the same dark jacket most mornings, with a small repair notebook folded into the back pocket of his jeans. People in Boise knew he had been in the Navy, and a few guessed more than that from the way he scanned rooms before entering them, but Tucker never offered details. Some lives were easier to carry when nobody asked to see inside them. Rook was the one exception. The old German Shepherd had been Tucker's canine partner overseas, and age had only softened the edges of him, never the watchfulness. His muzzle had gone silver around the mouth. One ear stood a little higher than the other, and his hips were slower on cold mornings. But his eyes still moved with the steady patience of a dog who had learned to read silence before sound. To Tucker, Rook was enough. They had their routine. Breakfast before sunrise, a short walk past the mailboxes, work if Tucker's job allowed the dog to ride along, then dinner in the apartment while the evening settled over the parking lot. Rook's bowl stayed beside the kitchen wall, his leash hung from the same hook near the door, and his old padded bed sat beneath the window where he could watch the stairs. Everything had a place. But civilian life did not always know what to do with 2 old partners who still remembered another world. On walks, Rook sometimes stopped too long at a trash bag blown against a maple tree, nose working with the seriousness of a dog searching for something more dangerous than wet paper and coffee cups. When a delivery driver came up the stairs with a cardboard box, Rook stepped between the man and Tucker before Tucker could tell him there was no need. The dog always moved back when told. That was the part Tucker hated most. Rook obeyed, then lowered his head in a way that made Tucker feel as if he had corrected loyalty itself. The old dog had spent years being useful in ways that mattered, and now the world kept offering him harmless noises, passing bicycles and neighbors carrying groceries. Tucker understood that feeling better than he wanted to. He had habits of his own that no longer fit the life in front of him. He checked Rook's paws too often after short walks, wiped the leash even when it was barely dusty, and measured the dog's food with the care of someone preparing for conditions that no longer existed. He told himself it was responsibility, but sometimes, in the quiet after dinner, he wondered if he was only trying to prove that Rook still needed him. Rook would look at him from across the room, calm and unreadable. Across the hall lived Nora Ellis, who worked evening shifts at the Copper Spoon Diner downtown. She was in her early 30s, with tired eyes that still found reasons to smile, and she usually came home smelling faintly of coffee, grill smoke, and lemon cleaner. Tucker knew her schedule the way apartment neighbors learned things without meaning to, through footsteps, closing doors, and the thin walls of ordinary life. They spoke sometimes, never for long. Nora had learned not to push. She said hello when she saw him, asked about Rook when the weather turned cold, and once left a paper bag of leftover biscuits outside Tucker's door after a storm knocked power out on the block. Tucker had opened the door before she reached her apartment, nodded once, and said, "Thank you," in a voice that sounded unused to needing anything. Nora remembered that. She also knew Rook always placed himself slightly ahead of Tucker in the hallway. The dog did it with delivery drivers, maintenance workers, children running up the stairs, and once with a woman carrying a laundry basket so full that a sock fell out near Tucker's boot. Rook had picked up the sock and carried it back with solemn dignity, which made Nora laugh so hard she had to lean against her door. Tucker almost smiled that day. Almost. The evening everything changed was cool but not unpleasant. A dry wind moved through the apartment complex, lifting leaves from the curb and sending them skittering across the parking lot like small things trying to escape before winter found them. Tucker had finished repairing a sagging gate near Hill Road, eaten a sandwich over the sink, and settled at the kitchen table with a utility bill he had been meaning to pay for 3 days. Rook lay near the door. Around 10:40, Nora came up the stairs after a late shift. Her feet hurt, her hair had loosened from its clip, and one sleeve of her diner uniform carried a small coffee stain from a customer who had apologized 3 times and tipped badly anyway. She was reaching for her keys when she noticed movement near Tucker's door. At first, she thought someone had dropped a jacket. Then the jacket lifted its head. A small German Shepherd puppy sat on the hallway carpet outside Tucker's apartment, looking around with the puzzled seriousness of a traveler who had taken several wrong turns and decided this door looked reasonable enough. Its black and tan coat held a little dust from outside, and its ears seemed too large for its head, one standing while the other leaned sideways as if still thinking about it. The puppy wore no collar that Nora could see. It did not seem hurt, it simply sat there. Nora crouched a few feet away, keeping her voice low. "Hey, little guy," she said, soft enough not to startle it or wake the entire building. The puppy looked at her, wagged once, then turned back to Tucker's door as if it had already made up its mind. Inside the apartment, Rook rose before Tucker heard anything. The old K9 stood very still, nose angled toward the bottom of the door, body alert without making a sound. Tucker looked up from the bill, watched the dog for half a second, and pushed back his chair. He crossed the room slowly, one hand resting near Rook's shoulder, and opened the door. The hallway light spilled into the apartment. The puppy looked up at him. For a moment, nobody moved. Nora stood across the hall with her keys still in her hand. Rook remained behind Tucker with his body blocking half the doorway, and Tucker stared down at the small dog as if the hallway had placed a question at his feet. The puppy gave a small, uncertain wag, then sat a little straighter. Tucker's face changed in a way Nora could not name. He looked at the puppy, then at Rook, then at Nora. The old dog's ears stayed forward, his eyes fixed on the stranger near the threshold, and Tucker seemed to weigh something that had nothing to do with space, food, or whether the building allowed pets. After a long breath, he stepped back. Then he closed the door. Nora remained still. She had expected it, maybe, but expectation did not make the sound of the latch feel any warmer. The puppy blinked at the closed door, lowered its nose toward the carpet, and stayed exactly where it was. For a few seconds, the hallway accepted Tucker's answer. Then the answer changed. From inside the apartment came the sound of a drawer opening, then footsteps returning across the floor. Rook's shadow moved beneath the crack of the door. The lock turned again, slower this time, and Tucker Hayes opened the door a second time. Now let's step inside Tucker's quiet apartment and see what Rook does next. If you'd like to support more stories like this, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Tucker opened the door wider, though every part of him seemed to resist the motion. Rook stayed at his side, shoulder nearly touching Tucker's knee, his body angled between the apartment and the small German Shepherd sitting on the hallway carpet. Nora did not step closer until Tucker gave the faintest nod. "Looks like he picked your door," she said quietly. Tucker looked down at the puppy. That was his first mistake. The puppy wagged once, as if the insult had been accepted with good manners. Tucker disappeared into the apartment and returned with an old towel from a kitchen drawer. He laid it on the floor just inside the door, then stepped back with the careful distance of a man trying to turn kindness into a temporary arrangement. The puppy walked in slowly, sniffed the towel, circled once, and sat down as if the matter had been settled by someone wiser than everyone in the room. Rook did not agree. The old canine moved forward and lowered his head, taking in the puppy's scent with grave concentration. His ears stayed high, his eyes steady, and his tail remained still behind him. The puppy looked up at Rook, blinked, and gave a tiny lick at the air near his muzzle. Rook stepped back. Nora covered her mouth, but Tucker saw the smile anyway. "Don't start," he said. "I didn't say anything." "You were about to." "I was about to say he's polite. He's trespassing." The puppy yawned in the middle of Tucker's sentence, then rested his chin on the edge of the towel. It was not dramatic, and it was not helpless. It was simply small, out of place, and far too comfortable in a room where Tucker preferred everything to remain explainable. Nora went across the hall and came back with a shallow bowl of water and a small container of soft food she said a friend had left after fostering a young dog. The puppy drank a little, ate slowly, and then began examining the apartment with the curious seriousness of someone inspecting a new kingdom. Tucker stood near the counter with his arms folded, while Rook watched from beside the kitchen wall. "I'm not keeping him," Tucker said. Nora set the empty bowl near the sink. "I heard you. I mean it. I believed you the first time." That made Tucker look at her, but Nora's face gave nothing away. She had the tired patience of someone who had spent years carrying plates to people who thought coffee refills were emergencies. She knew how to let a person hold on to a sentence until it stopped protecting them. The puppy sneezed. Rook looked offended. By midnight, Nora had gone back across the hall, and Tucker had placed the towel near the kitchen where he could see it from the couch. Rook lay between Tucker and the puppy, though not as close as he usually stayed. Every few minutes, the old dog lifted his head to check the small visitor, then lowered it again with the burdened air of a guard assigned to a post he had not requested. Tucker told himself Rook disliked the arrangement. That made it easier. The next morning, the apartment woke before Tucker did. A soft scratching sound came from the living room, followed by a thump, then another thump, then a small sneeze that sounded strangely proud of itself. Tucker opened his eyes and found the puppy trying to climb onto the couch, hind legs slipping on the rug while his front paws clung to the cushion. Rook stood beside him, watching with silent judgment. The puppy slid backward and landed on his rear. He sat there, surprised by the floor, then immediately tried again. Tucker rubbed a hand over his face, and despite himself, a sound almost escaped him. Almost. Nora knocked 15 minutes later with 2 coffees. When Tucker opened the door, the puppy trotted toward her, tripped over one of Rook's chew toys, recovered badly, and continued as if the stumble had been part of the plan. Nora looked past Tucker at the living room, where one sock had migrated beneath the table and a roll of paper towels had been nudged halfway off the counter. "Busy morning?" she asked. "He's got no respect for property. He's 7 weeks old, so he's had 7 weeks to learn." Nora laughed, and the puppy wagged as if the laughter belonged to him. Rook remained near Tucker, but his eyes followed every small movement across the room. When the puppy wandered too close to the open toolbox near the wall, Rook stepped forward and nudged the box shut with his nose. Tucker noticed. He pretended not to. By late morning, the puppy had discovered Tucker's work boot, the lower shelf of the bookcase, and the dangling end of Rook's leash. He grabbed the leash in his teeth and backed away with remarkable confidence for someone who weighed less than the toolbox he had just tried to climb into. Rook stared at him as if an ancient military code had been violated. Nora nearly spilled her coffee. "You know," she said, "we can't keep calling him the puppy." Tucker's answer came too fast. "We're not naming him." "Of course. Naming makes things complicated. Things are already complicated. He's currently stealing from a retired military working dog." The puppy pulled harder on the leash, lost his grip, and tumbled sideways onto the rug. He popped back up, ears uneven, eyes bright, and tail going as though he had won a private war. Nora tilted her head. "He looks like a Milo." Tucker opened his mouth to reject it. The puppy looked up at him right then, one ear flopped sideways, Rook's leash still between his paws, wearing the innocent expression of a criminal with no record. Tucker exhaled through his nose. "Milo," he said, like he was testing a tool for weight. The puppy wagged. Nora smiled softly. "Milo it is." Rook blinked once, which Nora chose to interpret as official approval. Tucker chose to interpret it as nothing at all. though he still caught himself using the name before dinner when the puppy tried to crawl halfway into his open work bag. Milo came running when called, skidded on the kitchen floor, and bumped gently into Rook's front leg. Rook looked down. Milo sat on Rook's paw. For several long seconds, the old canine did not move. Tucker watched from the counter, waiting for Rook to step away or rumble low in his chest or make clear that the apartment had limits. Instead, Rook lowered himself to the floor with careful dignity, leaving his paw exactly where it was. Milo fell asleep against it. That evening, Boise cooled under a pale orange sky. Wind moved dry leaves across the parking lot, and the hallway light outside Tucker's door flickered once before steadying again. Tucker sat on the couch with a folded instruction sheet from a puppy care website on his knee, though he would have denied reading it if Nora had asked. Rook lay near the old navy jacket Tucker kept folded beside the bookshelf. Milo waddled over, sniffed the jacket, and curled up partly on one sleeve. The sight tightened something in Tucker's chest before he could name it. Rook lifted his head. For a moment, Tucker thought the old dog would claim the jacket back. That jacket still held the smell of storage, dust, old rain, and years Tucker rarely mentioned. It had belonged to the life only Rook understood. Milo shifted in his sleep and began sliding off the sleeve. Rook reached out with his muzzle and pushed him gently back onto the fabric. Nobody spoke. Over the next few days, the apartment became less orderly and more alive. Tucker bought a chew toy and said it was cheaper than replacing socks. He moved the trash can onto the counter and called it common sense. He searched online for puppy feeding schedules after midnight, then closed the laptop too quickly when Nora knocked the next morning. Rook changed more quietly. He stopped standing between Tucker and Milo every time the puppy crossed the room. He began sleeping close enough that Milo could find him in the dark. Once, when Milo startled at a truck backfiring outside, Rook rose, walked over, and stood beside him until the puppy's tail stopped tucking under. Tucker saw all of it. That was the problem. For the first few days, Tucker told himself the puppy was only an interruption. But interruptions had a dangerous way of becoming routines when they learned where to sleep. By the end of the week, Milo knew the sound of Nora's footsteps, the location of Tucker's boots, and the safest place to nap near Rook without being stepped on. Tucker still said he was not keeping him, usually while filling a second small bowl or moving a cord out of reach. Nora never argued. She did not need to. The thing that frightened Tucker was not that Milo needed him. He knew how to be needed when the task was clear, when the rules were written, when the danger had a shape. What unsettled him was quieter than that, and far more difficult to command. Milo was making the apartment warmer, and Rook felt it too. By Sunday evening, Tucker had started arranging his life around Milo while still insisting the puppy did not belong to him. A small bowl sat beside Rook's water dish, 2 chew toys had appeared under the coffee table, and a folded towel near the kitchen had become a bed no one admitted was permanent. Rook no longer watched Milo like an intruder, though he still lifted his head whenever the puppy wandered too close to Tucker's old navy jacket. That was what scared Tucker. He waited until Nora came home from her afternoon shift, then carried Milo across the hall with the careful stiffness of a man doing something practical. Nora opened the door in her diner shoes, her hair pinned loosely back, and the smell of coffee and fried onion still clinging to her sleeve. Milo wagged at her immediately, as if every door in the building belonged to someone worth visiting. "I think he should stay with you for a few days," Tucker said. Nora looked from Milo to Tucker, then past him to Rook standing in the open doorway across the hall. "A few days? My place is too small for 2 dogs. It looked bigger yesterday. Rook needs quiet." Nora did not answer right away. She noticed the second water bowl by Tucker's door, the chew toy tucked under his arm by accident, and the way Rook's eyes stayed fixed on Milo without the hard edge he had carried the first night. Tucker had a way of making fear sound like responsibility. She took Milo anyway. At first, the arrangement seemed to work. Nora's apartment was warmer in a different way, with a crocheted blanket over the couch, a stack of library books near the window, and a row of mugs drying beside the sink. Milo sniffed every corner, stole one of her socks from a laundry basket, and fell asleep under the small table where Nora ate most of her late dinners. Tucker told himself that was good. His own apartment returned to order by the next morning. No towel bunched near the kitchen, no puppy bowl in the way, no small body trying to climb into his work bag while he packed a drill and some spare screws. Rook settled near the door, his head on his paws, exactly where he had slept for years before Milo arrived. Everything was back in place, except it felt wrong. The quiet did not feel like peace anymore. It filled the corners too fully, sat too heavily over the couch, and made the old clock above the stove sound louder than it had any right to sound. Tucker poured Rook's breakfast, rinsed the empty second bowl before remembering he no longer needed it, then stood at the sink longer than necessary. Rook watched him. Over the next 2 days, both of them learned how absence could have weight. Rook began lying closer to the door, sometimes raising his head when Nora's footsteps crossed the hall. Once, Tucker found him sniffing the towel Milo had used, then turning away with the embarrassed dignity of an old soldier caught missing something small. Tucker almost knocked on Nora's door twice. Both times he stopped. He told himself Milo was better off. Nora had a softer voice, a cleaner schedule on her days off, and the kind of patience that made young things feel less like interruptions. He told himself Rook was calmer now, and maybe calm was what they had needed all along. For a while, that sounded true enough to survive. But some silences are not empty because nothing is there. They are empty because something has been removed. Friday night brought a home game at Boise State and a small fall festival downtown, which meant the Copper Spoon dinner stayed crowded long past its usual rush. Nora moved between booths with a coffee pot in one hand and a stack of checks in the other, smiling when she could, apologizing when the kitchen ran behind, and glancing at the clock more often as the night dragged on. She had left Milo with water, soft food, a blanket, and a few toys near the couch, expecting to be gone 6 hours. It became almost 10. When Nora finally climbed the stairs at Maple Ridge, the hallway was quiet and the parking lot below held a thin layer of mist. Her feet ached inside her work shoes, and one pocket of her apron still held 3 quarters and a note from a regular who always wrote Bible verses on napkins. She unlocked her door, already whispering Milo's name before she stepped inside. No pause came running. Nora froze. Milo was lying on the blanket near the couch, awake but unusually still. His tail moved once when he saw her, and his ears lifted a little before settling back down. The food bowl had barely been touched, and the water bowl was still too full. He was not in danger, but he was not himself. Nora knelt beside him, touched his side, and felt the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Relief came first, then guilt close behind it. She had not meant to leave him so long, had not meant for a puppy who had already changed homes once that week to spend an entire noisy evening waiting in an unfamiliar room. She was across the hall in seconds. Tucker opened before she knocked a second time. One look at her face made his hand tighten on the doorframe. Rook slipped past him into the hall, moving with a purpose Tucker had not seen in days. "What happened?" Tucker asked. "I don't know. He's awake, but he won't really get up." Rook entered Nora's apartment first. He lowered his nose near Milo, breathed in slowly, then looked back at Tucker with a stillness that stripped the room of every excuse. This was not a trash bag under a tree, or a delivery driver on the stairs, or a bicycle cutting across a park path. This was real. Tucker crossed the room and knelt beside Milo. The puppy blinked at him, then shifted closer, resting his chin against Tucker's wrist. The gesture was small, ordinary, and worse than any cry would have been. "Get your keys," Tucker said. The veterinary clinic near Fairview Avenue was open late for emergencies, though the waiting room looked half asleep when they arrived. Nora drove with both hands tight on the wheel, apologizing under her breath until Tucker quietly told her to breathe. He sat in the passenger seat with Milo wrapped in the same old towel from his kitchen, keeping one hand over the puppy's shoulders to steady him. Rook rode in the back, silent and watchful. At the clinic, a technician took Milo to the treatment area while Tucker, Nora, and Rook waited beneath fluorescent lights that made everyone look more tired than they were. Nora sat with her elbows on her knees, twisting a paper receipt from the diner between her fingers. Tucker stood, sat, stood again, then finally leaned against the wall near Rook. The old canine did not lie down. After an hour, the veterinarian came out with a calm face and good news. Milo was not seriously ill. He was a little dehydrated, tired from being alone too long, and likely stressed by the sudden changes in routine and place. With fluids, rest, and a steadier environment, he would be fine. Nora covered her mouth. Tucker looked toward the treatment room and said nothing. The answer should have made everything simple. Milo had food, water, warmth, and people who cared enough to bring him in before things became serious. Still, the veterinarian's words settled heavily between them, because care was not always the same thing as belonging. Some living things needed more than a safe room. They needed to know where home was. By morning, the clinic smelled of disinfectant, warmed towels, and coffee that had been sitting too long on a small table near the reception desk. Milo had improved after fluids and rest, and the young technician smiled when she brought him back wrapped loosely in a soft blue blanket. Nora touched the top of his head with 2 fingers, as if checking that the night had truly let him go. Tucker said nothing for a while. Rook stood beside his chair, nose lifted toward Milo, his old body still carrying the quiet strain of the hours before sunrise. When Milo wriggled enough to lick the side of Tucker's wrist, Rook finally exhaled and lowered himself to the floor. The sound was small, but Tucker heard it. The worst had passed. Then the technician paused over the paperwork. Did anyone check him for a microchip? Nora looked up. He has one? We should scan just in case. The scanner beeped less than a minute later. The technician wrote down the number, typed it into the clinic computer, and waited while the screen loaded. Tucker watched her expression change from routine concentration to careful surprise. The night had almost convinced them that the hardest decision was where Milo belonged. Morning had a quieter question waiting. There's a registered owner, the technician said. Eleanor Price. She lives less than a mile from Maple Ridge. Nora turned toward Tucker. He kept his eyes on Milo. The record listed Eleanor's address, phone number, and the shelter that had transferred ownership 1 week earlier. Under name, the field was blank. Male German Shepherd puppy, approximately 7 weeks old, black and tan, no name. That detail stayed with Tucker during the drive. Nora sat in the passenger seat this time, holding Milo in the blanket, while Rook rode in the back and watched the road between the front seats. Boise looked softer after the long night, with pale sun touching the wet edges of fallen leaves and a thin autumn mist lifting from lawns. Eleanor Price lived in a small white house on a quiet street shaded by old maples. Yellow chrysanthemums sat in clay pots near the porch steps, and a wind chime hung from a hook beside the front door. One of the fence panels near the side yard leaned slightly, the kind of thing Tucker noticed without meaning to. Nora called first from the driveway. The woman who opened the door a few minutes later was small and silver-haired, wearing a pale cardigan buttoned wrong at the top. Her eyes were red in the way. Eyes looked after several nights of poor sleep, and one hand stayed on the doorframe as if she needed it more than she wanted anyone to see. Then she saw Milo. "Oh," she whispered. Milo lifted his head in Nora's arms. His tail moved beneath the blanket. Then he squirmed gently until Nora set him down on the porch. He trotted to Eleanor with the uncertain excitement of a puppy who recognized kindness before he understood addresses. Eleanor sank to her knees. She did not cry loudly. She only gathered him close with both hands trembling against his back, her face bent near his ear. Milo pressed his nose against her sleeve, then pawed clumsily at the soft fabric of her cardigan. "I looked everywhere," Eleanor said. "You little wanderer." Tucker looked away. Inside, the house carried the smell of cinnamon, old wood, and laundry soap. Family photographs lined the mantel, though several frames still had the quiet unevenness of things recently moved. A man with kind eyes appeared in many of them beside Eleanor, standing in a garden, holding a fishing rod, sitting on the same porch where Milo had just been returned. Eleanor noticed Tucker looking. "My husband passed a few weeks ago," she said, smoothing one hand over Milo's back. "Henry. We were married 58 years. Nora's face softened. "I'm sorry. Thank you." Eleanor tried to smile. "After the funeral, the house got too quiet. A friend from the senior center drove me to the shelter last week. I thought maybe a young dog would help me keep moving." She looked down at Milo, who was chewing gently on the edge of the blanket as if serious grief had no idea what to do with him. "I hadn't named him yet," Eleanor said. "I tried. I wrote a few names on a grocery receipt and crossed them all out. After losing Henry, even saying a new name in this house felt bigger than it should have." Nora glanced at Tucker. "We've been calling him Milo," Eleanor repeated it softly. "Milo." The puppy looked up at the sound, one ear tilting sideways. His tail tapped the floor twice. Eleanor laughed through the wetness in her eyes. "Well," she said, "maybe he was waiting for someone else to find the name." For a while, the room settled into a gentle kind of relief. Eleanor made coffee she forgot to drink. Nora told her how Milo had shown up outside Tucker's door, and Tucker gave short, practical answers about the vet visit. Rook stayed near Tucker's chair, but Eleanor kept glancing at him with the careful respect people gave old service dogs when they understood they were looking at more than a pet. When Tucker stood to leave, Milo followed. He trotted after Tucker to the front door, caught the cuff of his jeans in his tiny teeth, and held on with more determination than strength. The room went still. Eleanor called his new name, and Milo turned his head toward her, tail moving, but he did not let go. Nora crouched beside him. "Milo, sweetheart." He stayed where he was. Tucker looked uncomfortable in a way Nora had come to recognize. He did not want to take what belonged to Eleanor. He also did not want to pull away from a puppy who had already learned to search for him at every door. Eleanor watched the scene for a long moment. Then she invited them back to the kitchen table. She told them about Autumn Companion Week at the Senior Center, a 7-day series of walks, library visits, a small charity market, and a picnic at the end. Her friends had urged her to come, especially after Henry's death. Eleanor had planned to bring Milo before he slipped out through the side gate on a damp evening when the latch had not caught. "But he's so little," she said, looking at him with affection rather than disappointment. "Crowds, music, bicycles, bigger dogs. After last night, I don't want to ask too much of him too soon." Her eyes moved to Rook. "I would never want to borrow him like he is a thing," she said carefully. "But if Rook could stay with me for that week, I think I could go. I think I could walk into those rooms without feeling quite so alone." Tucker's hand tightened around his coffee cup. Rook was not a thing to lend. He was the last living witness to a life Tucker rarely spoke about, the old shadow at his door, the breathing weight beside his bed when sleep turned rough. Letting him stay somewhere else for a whole week felt foolish before Tucker could explain why. Milo pressed against Tucker's boot. Rook rose. The old German shepherd walked across the kitchen and stopped beside Eleanor's chair. He lowered his head under her hand, calm and deliberate, as if the choice had been made in a language older than permission. Eleanor did not move at first. Then her fingers settled gently between his ears. Tucker looked at Rook for a long time. "All right," he said quietly. So that afternoon the exchange was made without ceremony. Rook stayed in the small white house with the wind chime and the yellow chrysanthemums, while Tucker carried Milo back toward the truck under a sky turning silver with the promise of rain. At the porch steps, Tucker looked back once. Rook was standing beside Eleanor in the doorway. The first morning without Rook began with a silence Tucker did not recognize. Milo was still there, trotting unevenly across the kitchen with one of Tucker's socks dragging behind him like a prize from a battlefield too small to matter. The coffee maker clicked, the old refrigerator hummed, and pale gold light slipped through the blinds onto the floor. Nothing in the apartment was empty enough to explain the weight in Tucker's chest. Still, Rook was gone. Tucker stood near the door longer than usual, looking at the hook where Rook's leash had always hung. He had left it there out of habit, though the old German shepherd was across town with Eleanor Price, beginning a week of senior center walks, library visits, and polite community events that sounded nothing like a mission. Milo dropped the sock at Tucker's boot and looked up, pleased with himself. "You're not helping," Tucker said. Milo wagged anyway. The puppy made the apartment brighter in ways Tucker could not deny. He chased a tennis ball into the leg of the coffee table, barked once at his own reflection in the dark window, and fell asleep on Tucker's old navy jacket with his head tipped back in complete trust. Nora came by after her breakfast shift with 2 coffees and a paper bag from Copper Spoon Diner, then stopped when she saw Tucker glancing again toward the leash hook. "How's it going?" she asked. "Fine," that sounded convincing. It was meant to. Nora smiled, but she did not press. She set the coffee on the counter, bent to scratch Milo behind one ear, and helped Tucker rescue a receipt the puppy had stolen from his work bag. The easy rhythm between them had changed since the night at the clinic, not into anything spoken, but into something quieter and more dangerous. Comfort. Across town, Rook moved through Eleanor's house like he had been assigned to guard a fragile piece of history. He slept beside the bedroom door, followed her to the kitchen in the morning, and watched while she made 1 cup of coffee instead of 2. When Eleanor reached for a second mug by mistake, Rook lowered his head against her knee until her hand found his fur. She did not say thank you. She did not need to. On Monday, Rook walked beside Eleanor through a small park near the senior center, where wet leaves clung to the path and the air smelled of damp grass. He kept his pace slow, never pulling ahead, never crowding her feet. When Eleanor stopped to catch her breath near a bench, Rook stopped too, as if the whole morning had been built around that pause. By Tuesday, the group knew his name. Older women with bright scarves and paper cups of coffee greeted him at the library entrance. An elderly man in a veteran's cap nodded at Rook as if recognizing rank. During the reading hour, Rook lay beneath Eleanor's chair while she listened to a local teacher read from a book about Idaho trails, one hand resting lightly on the old dog's back. Rook stayed still the whole time. That evening, Tucker found himself making Rook's dinner before he remembered. The measuring cup was already in his hand, the food bin open, Milo sitting beside him with great interest in whatever mistake might benefit him. Tucker closed the lid slowly and leaned one hand against the counter. Milo tilted his head. "I know," Tucker said. "Old habit." But it was more than that. Tucker missed the sound of Rook checking the door before bed, the sigh under the kitchen table, the steady weight of him in the room. He even missed the unnecessary alerts, the way Rook would stand between him and a delivery driver, as if cardboard boxes still carried secrets. For months, Tucker had thought those things proved Rook could not settle into civilian life. Now, he wondered if they had been Rook's way of saying he was still there. Wednesday brought wind. It pushed dry leaves along the sidewalks and snapped Eleanor's wind chime against the porch post with small silver sounds. At the senior center charity market, Rook stood beside her table while she helped sell jars of apple butter and folded dish towels sewn by one of the women from her group. People stopped to ask about him. Eleanor told them his name, then Tucker's name, then the careful version of how a lost puppy had found the wrong door and somehow led her to the right dog for one difficult week. She did not tell them that her hands shook less when Rook stood beside her. She did not say the house felt less like a place waiting for someone who would never come home. But Rook knew. Later that afternoon, at the edge of the park, a teenager on an electric scooter came around the bend too fast. Eleanor startled and stepped back. Rook moved half a step in front of her, planted his paws, and gave one low, steady bark. The scooter slowed at once. "Sorry, Mom," the teenager called, embarrassed. Eleanor placed her hand on Rook's back. The old dog did not chase, strain, or make the moment larger than it was. He simply stood there until Eleanor's breathing settled. Protection had changed shape. Back at Maple Ridge, Tucker was learning the same lesson from the other side. Milo needed constant supervision, but he also brought laughter into places Tucker had kept locked for years. He slid across the kitchen chasing a bottle cap, climbed halfway into Tucker's toolbox, and once fell asleep with his nose inside one of Rook's old boots. Nora found him that way on Thursday night. She laughed softly, then looked at Tucker when he did not laugh with her. He was watching Milo, but his face had gone somewhere else. "He'll be back Sunday," Nora said. Tucker nodded. "I know." "That's not what you're worried about." He looked toward the window. Outside, Boise had gone blue with evening, and the parking lot lights had turned the mist into a thin glow. Milo stirred in his sleep, paw twitching against the boot. "I used to think Rook needed me," Tucker said. "Then we came home, and half the things he did didn't fit anymore." Nora waited. "I started thinking maybe I was keeping him close because I didn't know what else to do with myself." The apartment held the words gently. Nora did not try to fix them. She only sat across from him with her coffee cooling between both hands, patient enough to let the truth remain unfinished. Tucker looked down at Milo. "I miss my partner," he said. By Sunday afternoon, Eleanor's backyard was full of folding chairs, plaid tablecloths, paper plates, and the warm smell of baked apples. Autumn Companion Week ended with a small picnic beneath two old maples, where the senior center group moved slowly but cheerfully, arguing over where to put the lemonade and whether the clouds would hold off until evening. Tucker arrived with Nora and Milo. Milo saw Eleanor first and pulled toward her with happy, tumbling urgency. Then he saw Rook near the porch and changed direction so quickly that his paws slipped on the grass. A few people laughed, and Rook, dignified as ever, lowered his head just in time for Milo to bump into his chest. Then Rook saw Tucker. He did not run. He walked across the yard with the measured steps of an old soldier returning from a duty he had completed well. Tucker knelt before he reached him, and Rook placed his head into Tucker's hands. For a long moment, neither moved. Eleanor watched from the porch. Milo pressed against her ankle now, chewing gently on the edge of a pale blue wool scarf she had dropped from her chair. When she bent to pick it up, Milo followed the scarf, tucked his nose into it, and settled beside her slippers with a sigh so certain that Tucker felt the answer before he understood it. Milo belonged there too, not away from Tucker, not away from Rook. With Eleanor, in the house that had first tried to make room for him before grief knew how. By late afternoon, the exchange had undone itself without closing anything. Rook climbed into Tucker's truck and sat where he always had, calm and sure. Milo stayed beside Eleanor, the blue scarf under one paw, watching Tucker with bright eyes but making no move to follow. Nora stood beside Tucker near the gate. "You okay?" she asked. Tucker looked at Rook, then at Milo, then at Eleanor, smiling through the screen of the porch light. "Yeah," he said. "I think we all are." After that, Rook returned to Maple Ridge. Milo stayed with Eleanor, and Nora still knocked on Tucker's door after late shifts with coffee leftovers or some small story from the diner. Rook visited Eleanor a few days each week, walking beside her to the senior center like an appointment both of them secretly needed. The week had ended. The family had not. The months after the picnic moved quietly, the way good changes often do when no one is trying to announce them. Tucker fixed the loose porch step at Eleanor's house, replaced the rusted hinge on the back gate, and patched the section of fence where the latch had failed on the damp evening Milo wandered away. Eleanor paid him in coffee, peach preserves, and the kind of stubborn insistence that made refusing feel disrespectful. Tucker accepted all three. Rook found a new rhythm without losing the old one. He still slept near Tucker's apartment door, still followed him from room to room when the nights grew too quiet, and still rested his heavy head on Tucker's boot when the world outside the window went dark. Twice a week, though, Tucker drove him to Eleanor's house, where Rook stepped out of the truck with the calm seriousness of a dog reporting for work. Milo grew fast in Eleanor's care. His ears finally began to match his head, his paws remained too large for his body, and his confidence expanded until the little white house seemed to orbit around him. He carried socks from the laundry room, dragged his blue wool scarf from one end of the hallway to the other, and greeted Rook, each visit like a parade had been organized in his honor. Eleanor laughed more after that. Nora started coming by on her days off. Sometimes she brought soup from Copper Spoon Diner, sometimes leftover biscuits, sometimes nothing at all except the tired smile of a woman who had spent too many hours asking strangers if they wanted more coffee. She would sit at Eleanor's kitchen table while the older woman told stories about Henry, about the garden he had planted too late every spring, and about the old dog who used to sleep under the dining table, waiting for dropped toast. Tucker usually pretended to be busy nearby. He fixed the porch light while Nora held the ladder steady. He repaired a cabinet door while she sorted Eleanor's medicine bottles by day of the week. He helped carry groceries inside while Nora stood in the kitchen reading labels aloud because Eleanor refused to admit she had forgotten her glasses on purpose. No one called it courtship. Milo did not respect such restraint. He knocked over a potted plant one rainy afternoon and sent dark soil across Eleanor's sunroom floor, forcing Tucker and Nora to kneel side by side with paper towels while the puppy sat in the middle of the mess looking deeply satisfied. Nora laughed first, then Tucker, and even Rook gave a long sigh from the doorway as if disappointed in all civilians involved. The rain tapped softly against the glass. By winter, Nora knew how Tucker took his coffee, and Tucker knew she rubbed her right wrist after long shifts. By spring, she had a key to Eleanor's house for errands, and Tucker kept a spare umbrella in his truck because Nora always forgot hers. Nothing happened all at once, which made it harder for either of them to be afraid of it. Then, summer brought a different kind of weather. Copper Spoon Diner changed owners in July. The new man painted the sign brighter, changed the menu, and began cutting hours with the cheerful voice of someone who had never learned the names of regular customers. Nora survived the first round of changes, then the second, but by August she stood outside the diner with a cardboard box holding 2 mugs, a folded apron, and 8 years of routines that no longer needed her. She told Tucker it was temporary. Her rent notice did not agree. For a few weeks, Nora kept smiling as if a smile could stretch the money in her checking account. She picked up shifts at a bakery, filled out applications at night, and told Eleanor not to worry whenever the older woman watched her too closely. The smile stayed, but it grew thinner, like paper held too near a flame. Eleanor saw it first. One late afternoon, Tucker was in her backyard repairing the outdoor faucet while Rick lay in the shade and Milo investigated a row of marigolds with unnecessary enthusiasm. Eleanor sat on the porch steps with a glass of iced tea in both hands, watching Tucker work with the patience of someone waiting for a man to hear what he already knew. The wind moved gently through the maple leaves above them. "She has opened doors for people her whole life," Eleanor said. Tucker tightened the wrench once more. "Nora? Who else would I be talking about?" He glanced over. Eleanor looked toward the house where Nora was rinsing dishes from lunch. "Your apartment has a spare room, Tucker, and that girl has spent too many years making sure everyone else had a place to sit." Tucker said nothing. That was answer enough. That night, Nora came by Maple Ridge to return a plastic container Eleanor had sent home with soup. Tucker stood in the doorway with Rook beside him, and for a second the hallway looked like it had on the night Milo first appeared, except no one there was the same person anymore. Tucker held the container in one hand and looked at the floor before he spoke. "The spare room is empty," he said. "If you need a place until things settle." Nora went still, he added, "no pressure." Rook leaned gently against Tucker's leg, which ruined whatever distance Tucker had hoped to keep in the offer. Nora looked from the dog to Tucker, then down at the container in his hand. Her eyes shone, though she blinked the tears back before they could become dramatic. "Okay," she said softly. The word changed the apartment. A year later, Eleanor's backyard filled with folding chairs, string lights, mason jars of autumn flowers, and senior center volunteers who took their duties far too seriously. One man argued that the chairs needed to face slightly east for better photographs, while two women debated the correct location for the apple pie table as if national security depended on it. Eleanor sat beneath the porch awning with tissues already folded in her lap. "I'm not crying," she announced. Milo stole one tissue. Rook wore a dark blue bow and walked beside Tucker with a dignity that made several guests whisper about how handsome he looked. Milo wore a cream-colored bow that had already shifted sideways, and when his turn came, he trotted down the aisle with such uneven enthusiasm that he nearly dragged the small flower basket into a row of chairs. The whole yard laughed, and Milo accepted the attention like a natural reward. Then Nora stepped into the garden. Tucker had seen her tired, worried, of laughing spilled dirt, half asleep over coffee, and standing in his hallway with a box of belongings she had tried not to grieve. Seeing her there beneath the maple trees, with Eleanor's handkerchief tucked around her bouquet and late sunlight caught in her hair, made him forget the small speech he had practiced. Rook pressed against his leg, steady as ever. Tucker breathed again. The ceremony was short. The vows were plain. The kiss made Eleanor give up, pretending she had not been crying for 10 minutes, and the senior center group applauded with the joyful lack of restraint that only people past a certain age can truly earn. Milo barked once at the clapping. Rook did not move. Later, under the string lights, Tucker looked across the yard at the life that had formed from one open door. Eleanor sat with Milo's head in her lap. Nora laughed with a group of elderly women near the pie table, and Rook stood beside Tucker, watching it all with the quiet satisfaction of an old partner who had seen him survive another kind of war. This one had asked him to stay. Tucker once believed he honored Rook because he fed him, walked him, and kept him close. Rook once seemed to believe his worth had been left behind with commands, danger, and work no civilian street could offer. Eleanor had thought growing older meant needing less, and Nora had spent years acting as if being tired was something she owed no one. The garden proved otherwise. Love was not always a rescue, and belonging did not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it came through a loose gate repaired before winter. A diner waitress offered a room without ceremony, an old K9 walking beside a widow, and a puppy who once chose the wrong door so 5 lives could find the right one. Under Eleanor's maple trees, with laughter rising into the cool evening, Tucker finally understood what had almost slipped past him. You do not wait for absence to teach you what presence was worth. What stays with me is not only the wedding, or even the moment Tucker opened the door. It is that second bowl he kept reaching for, the leash still hanging by the door, and the way Rook found purpose again by walking slowly beside someone who needed steady company. There is a quiet kind of loneliness that does not announce itself. It shows up in 1 cup of coffee instead of 2, in a diner uniform folded into a box, in a dog waiting near the door because the room no longer sounds right. I think grace often meets people there, not with thunder, but with a small responsibility that asks them to keep going. The people in this story are imagined, but the ache behind them is real. Many families are built this way, through errands, borrowed courage, porch lights, and the simple mercy of being noticed. If a pet, a neighbor, a friend, or one of God's small blessings has ever helped you through a lonely season, I'd love to read your thoughts, memories, or prayers in the comments. And if these grounded stories speak to you, liking and subscribing helps us keep sharing them. May God bless you and keep you close to the people, memories, and little everyday miracles that make life feel less lonely. Somewhere tonight, an old leash may still be waiting by the door for tomorrow's walk.